Okay, I'm calling to order this regular meeting of council. First, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of this now is First Nation. And it was actually really nice to walk into this afternoon and see the newly installed art installment outside. So it was, just again reminds me of the territory in which we hold our meetings and conduct our business. So at this point, I'm going to move the adoption of the agenda so that the December 7th, 2022 regular council meeting agenda be adopted as presented. Is there a seconder to that? Second by Councillor Savage. Any discussion, additions, deletions to the agenda? Okay, hearing or seeing nothing, I will move to calling the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's carried unanimously. That takes us on to general matters. So we have a delegation this afternoon. So we have Ms. Shelley, is that correct? Close?
Sheely, very
Sheely,
close.
sorry, my apologies, as Senior Planner to the Regional District of Nanaimo regarding the Regional Growth Strategy update, and this is for information. So at this point, I will pass the floor over to Ms. Sheely.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm joined on the line with my colleagues, Kim Fowler, Manager of Long Range Planning, Energy and Sustainability, as well as Lisa Grant, our General Manager of Planning and Development. I do have a brief presentation, so if you will bear with me 1 second, I will move to sharing my slide with you. This is always the test, isn't it?
And it's always fun when you're on the spot.
All right, so.
Where's that button gone?
I am busy clicking.
It is so stressful.
Can you sing us a Christmas carol, Mayor Swain, to take the pressure off while we're waiting?
What is, okay, this is so interesting.
Well, you know.
Just maybe an IT question to my colleagues on the line. I can see the green box indicating it's sharing, but you're obviously not.
You are now
anything.
sharing, yeah.
Okay.
Now you just gotta click on the little presentation button at the bottom of your screen.
Are you seeing my slides now?
Yeah, it's really small though, so I don't know if that's.
Oh, really small.
Well, on our screen it's really small, so I think you.
It is in the presentation mode. Yes, that's the way I have it on my screen. So
you need to flip it to me. The screen presenter switch, if you can.
It's on the bottom left hand.
So I see. Did that do anything?
If you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's that little projector screen shaped icon. Just click on that and that should work. Beside the screen magnifier bar.
Do you mean on the Zoom screen?
Well, it would be on your PowerPoint screen. The bottom of your PowerPoint screen, there should be
how is that? Is that zooming in for you?
No.
Oh gosh.
But there should be a little icon that's beside the Zoom feature. And it looks like a little projector screen.
Yeah, I'm clicking that. I've tried the Zoom scale bar as well. I've never had a problem with the size.
If you go back to how it was just before this, it was bigger then and it was adequate.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So
Kim is going to come and help you, Janae.
Yes, she is here. So she can see what I see, which is the full screen. I'm going to stop sharing and then let's try again. Apologies.
Yeah, that's it. No, don't choose screen one, choose the other one. So get back on again, stop share. Start share.
How are we doing now?
Not well, but I think we might just simply have to do it, without the PowerPoint because we do have a bit of a tight timeline for our meeting
Absolutely.
today. So I'm sure you'll forward along your slides after the presentation.
Absolutely. So just one quick question before I can absolutely talk to this. But prior to doing that, what are you actually seeing on your screen now?
It looks like your desktop for your PowerPoint application.
And close to that amount.
We'll just, yeah, it's stopped sharing now, Janae. We'll just carry on.
Yeah, I've stopped sharing. So you should just be seeing full view now, right? Okay. So in the absence of slides, your staff do also have the presentation already. So I don't know if that is helpful at this point or in this juncture, but I will just proceed with the information that we do have to share today. So the intent of our delegation was not to, baffle you with or, kind of dazzle you with my amazing IT skills. Instead, we were going to talk about and are going to talk about the RGS, most specifically the update that's currently happening with our regional growth strategy. But before I begin, I just wanted to lay a bit of a foundation to tell you what a regional growth strategy is. So in 1992, the province reintroduced the notion of regional planning. This is formalized in the legislation through two tools, a regional growth strategy and a regional context statement. The regional growth strategy, the main purpose is to promote coordination on issues that cross local government boundaries, such as housing, transportation, the environment, climate action, and more. So the regional growth strategy sits alongside the regional district's board strategic plan. It's an agreement between the member municipalities and the electoral areas on long-term sustainable growth. It sets out our vision and goals, and they're firmly established in the sustainability principles. It also includes a monitoring program that helps us to evaluate our progress towards those goals. So by comparison, more people can be more familiar with official community plans. So by comparison, an official community plan are much shorter in duration, on average about 5 years. They're more detailed. They represent the unique character and values specific to each electoral and municipal area. Official community plans are linked to our community's OCPs through regional context statements. These statements are embedded into the OCP, and they have to show how a community's aspiring aspirations align with and support the vision set out in the regional growth strategy. Now, this is where I do have an image to share with you, but I'll just talk us through it.
Actually,
what
we
I'm
do have
seeing-
the PowerPoint presentation up now. So
Oh, awesome.
one of our staff was able to put it up on our screen. So
Wonderful.
So
if we
if
could
you just
take
tell
us-
what slides to go to, and I'm sure we'll just follow along.
Exactly. So if you can take us forward to slide number 4, this is a map showing the land use designations as they are through the regional growth strategy. So this is a visual communication tool, and it shows the types of permitted land uses within the region. And they also show where growth is most intended to occur. So on the map in the gray are our urban areas, in the yellow are our rural village centers, and the growth containment boundaries are outlined in red. So the role of the regional growth strategy includes 3 key strategies. Those are the land use designations that you see on this map, as well as the growth containment boundaries I just mentioned in red and the supporting policies. Now, by design, the growth containment boundaries prevent urban sprawl and are used to promote compact, complete, and connected communities. So there's a little insert on that map. It's a focused shot of Lantzville, showing both the municipal boundary and the growth containment boundary in relation to that community in red. So you can see not all of Lantzville is within the growth containment boundary. Instead, only those lands where future growth is most intended, such as the village and the residential areas designated in Lantzville's official community plan. So next slide, please. So what are the benefits of all of this? As I noted, coordination is central, coordination between member municipalities, regional districts, and our senior government. And at the same time, it encourages us to pursue meaningful and collaborative relationships with our Indigenous communities. It's very much about regional thinking, helps improve decision-making around regional matters, such as housing, transit, ecological preservation, agricultural lands, and the such. It is very much future planning, planning for our future generations. It guides developments intended over the next 20 years that's both sustainable and supports efficient servicing. And it communicates the region's priorities. This is particularly important when applying for funding to senior levels of government because it demonstrates how funding is of regional significance and of benefit. Next slide. So I just want to focus now on what is under review. Like with any policy document, good housekeeping or good practice is to periodically review and incorporate any additional information. So in 2018, the board gave direction to approve review. The scope of that review is being summarized on this slide for key areas such as climate action, housing, transit, also upgrading demographic information, population projections, employment projections, and some key performance measures. You will note that there will be no changes to the land use designations or to the growth containment boundaries. Next slide. The review itself is taking part in 3 phases. First phase is consultation, which allowed us to further refine that scope, in consultation with our member municipalities. It also meant that we did a number of important background studies, such as a regional housing needs assessment, population projections, economic projections, social needs assessments, and others. The next phase was phase 2, which was engagement. This is where we presented a number of policy options and sought further input from our key stakeholders. And now we are in phase 3, which is the approvals process phase. We use the information that was gained through the engagement to now formulate our policy recommendations, which have been incorporated into a draft bylaw amendment. Next slide. So before I talk about next steps, I did want to just highlight a few things that we did hear from that engagement. They're summarized here on this slide. So with respect to climate action, we know the importance of natural environment. I particularly heard a lot around the importance of water resources and water-centric planning. Similarly, the importance of regional resiliency and disaster preparedness. Folks are interested in retrofitting, as well as looking at new technologies for waste diversion and ways to become more consumer and energy efficient. Next slide. With respect to the built environment, continued emphasis on growth management, focused growth in those urban centers, as well as the importance of regional collaboration. We've also heard top of mind remains affordable housing and creating more options for housing in our neighborhoods. Good design, quicker development processes, more streamlining. And then now looking to the next slide, turning to where we're at and next steps. Engagement is ongoing. That's part of the delegation today. Before we refer the bylaw for a formal comment to the municipalities, we're also meeting with our elected officials to let them know where we're at in the process. Once that is complete, each member municipality will receive a formal referral package. They'll have 60 days in which to provide comments. Following the closure of the comment period, the outcomes will be presented to the RDM board with requests to proceed with the adoption of that bylaw. And beyond any adoption of the bylaw, we then continue on with the implementation phases, which I've outlined here, where we continue to meet with our member municipalities to help prepare the draft implementation plan and seek approval on that. And I have one final slide, and it's simply to say thank you and to also direct you to where you can find additional information. We actually have 2 websites, and they're listed there on the slide. Any questions? We're also open to take those now.
Great, thank you for your presentation. Through to council, if there's any questions. So Councillor Savage, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much for that. It's very important to do that, planning growth in the long term. So the first thing is that I wanted to point out is I noticed all your urban containment boundaries are basically along the coast. And if you look at a map of the Ministry of Environment, there's a thin strip of coastal Douglas fir ecosystem along the east coast. And most of the urban containment boundaries contain that thin coastal strip, which means eventually we have nothing but a solid subdivision throughout the whole east coast of the regional district. And what Lantzville is trying to achieve is to preserve some of those coastal areas just as much as the interior areas, meaning quite the opposite of what you were suggesting, is containing all the growth along the coast. I tend to see it a little differently, that it's healthier for the ecosystems to intersperse developed areas with the green areas all the way to the coast and inwards. And it's also important to have some areas that are trying to achieve more green space than others, like Nanaimo's becoming a world-class city. I wouldn't expect them to want huge swaths of forest throughout their community, whereas Lantzville has that opportunity. That's the first thing. And the second thing is asking you about is if there's also a plan to preserve the most important green areas of the regional district, as well as just concentrating on the growth areas. Now is the time to do it over the next 50 years to preserve these important green areas so that there remains somewhat growth-free from development. And last quick thing, please, is the most southerly lot in Lantzville, that big Timber West property, how easy would that be to put within the urban containment boundary? And the reason I ask is with David Eby, with his plans to take some of the authority of municipalities in terms of growth projections and so on, that this could be a release valve for Lantzville to have some of our growth there to keep it out of these valuable coastal areas I was referring to. So how easy would that be? So those are my 3 points. If you could speak to those, please. Thank you.
I will do my very best to answer the first two. And I think there's also a bit of a conversation where we might have to pull in my colleagues or even the Director of Planning for Lantzville. And I believe Mr. Limshaw, is he available on this call as well? But to your first point, and I apologize if I wasn't clear in my presentation. So when I referred to the land use designation map on the slide, what I was wanting to highlight is in respect with Lantzville, Lantzville's growth containment boundary is not match up or align with the municipal boundary. So that doesn't mean that growth is intended to happen across all of Lantzville. It's actually the opposite. It is only meant to happen in discrete areas. And even within those discrete areas, it's the policies within Lantzville's OCPs that actually determine the growth in those areas. So through the RGS and the OCP, there's a lot of autonomy for municipalities to continue to make decisions within their own boundaries on how they choose to grow within their boundaries. So that's to my first point, and hopefully I've addressed the question regarding the area you've identified along the east coast of the forestry lands. And similarly with the open spaces, in fact, growth containment boundaries to preserve more of those open spaces, those green spaces that you mentioned. So in our rural context, or even within the rural lands of Lantzville, so policies that exist within the OCP of Lantzville, they don't allow for any further expansion of water services and sewer services for development for lands that are not within the growth containment area. So that's one way in which growth is managed in those areas to preserve those open spaces. And we have similar policies within our own electoral areas to make sure that we maintain those important rural lands. And then to your third one, I think that one's getting a little bit more involved, but what I'll start with saying is you were talking about a particular parcel, having it incorporated into an urban containment boundary. I believe that is a possibility of proceeding with that. It would generally come in as request through council. And if there needed to be an adjustment to the growth containment boundary, the regional growth containment boundary, that then would be a request that would come forward to the board for consideration. And I'll maybe open it up to my colleagues in case they had anything further to add.
I think, Jemay, you covered the content for that. It would come through Lantzville Council, typically through an OCP amendment process that you would seek for it to be included in that process, and then it would go through with a board approval. So it would need to be considered by the regional board whether it would be incorporated. Speaking to the specifics of the lot, obviously we don't have those details. So what that process looks like, what the current zoning and land use designation is, isn't something that we're able to speak to, but I'm sure your staff can speak to more specifics on the detail of that lot, whether it's at this meeting or at another time. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Much appreciated.
Any additional questions, Councilor Lerner? Go ahead. And can we get the screen share back on too, please? Or not or turned off? Yeah, so we can actually see the delegation.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative and much appreciated. I noticed there was talk about affordable housing, and the definition I've usually used for affordable and that I've heard at the provincial level is something where 30% of income is the cost of gross or total income is the cost of the housing. And that's how it's judged to be affordable or attainable housing. Is that the definition that's being used in the regional growth strategy? And are there plans to entice the development of co-ops or anything like that?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yes, as we all know, housing affordability is top of mind. The way the policies are informed in the RGS, those are the current ones as well as the proposed. We focus on both affordability and diversification of housing, because it is really kind of thinking of the region as a whole, and those are both important issues. So when we talk about how are we defining affordable housing, we actually define it more in our housing action plan. And in the context of the housing action plan, housing is defined at the moment by making sure it's housing that is adequate, it's suitable, it's satisfactory, and meets the needs of those residents. When you're talking about the core housing needs metric, the 30%, that is a measure. That measure is used in the housing needs assessment, and it's used in the regional housing needs assessment that we completed in 2021.
Excellent, thank you.
Councilor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Just one quick question. You mentioned under review a section on a slide called Climate Action and Resiliency. It's an area I'm particularly interested in. Could you speak a little bit to especially the resiliency component of that? Thank you.
Absolutely. I share your concern and passion for those particular topics. With respect to the RGS, we've actually worked very closely with a number of our colleagues internally who are working very focused on that work, Kim being one of them, Kim Fowler on the call today, as well as my colleague Jessica Barber in our climate section. With respect to resiliency, we work very closely with emergency management services, and myself, I manage several projects that look specifically at risk-based planning. So those are very much top of mind. And we also worked with a consultant with an expertise in climate action policy who helped us through a facilitated conversation to craft a number of policies that both look at climate mitigation and climate adaptation. So we're approaching that from a land use perspective, from an energy perspective, and very much from a water-centric planning perspective. So I look forward to sharing those draft policies through the referral process.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing them.
Anything else from council? Okay, hearing nothing. Again, thank you very much for presenting today. So I look forward to the next phase. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank you
time.
very much.
Okay, that takes us on to item 7 of our agenda, consent agenda. Is there any items that council wishes to have removed? Okay, hearing none, I'll make the motion that the recommendations listed for items 7A through 7C in the consent agenda be approved. Is there a seconder? Second by Councillor Savage. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed? That's carried unanimously. It takes us to item 8. I see nobody in the gallery for public input. Is there anybody remotely registered? So I will not read the preamble. We'll move on to item 9 of the agenda. So we're on to legislative matters. We have bylaw 172 for review. And at this point, just through to council, we are on a limited timeframe this afternoon. And we also have an in-camera session we have to get through as well. So with the next 2 items, so for 9A and 9B, it may be wise of this council just to simply refer these to a future meeting and to potentially submit questions in advance of that meeting. As even 9B or bylaw number 175, we could easily spend a whole day on that. So if we're going to give these either item any justice, I think we can have some discussion this afternoon. But I would say if we're going to get into any motions and so forth, that we potentially refer that to a future meeting. So Councillor Savage, go ahead.
Yes, I've got one amendment to the indemnification and delegation bylaw, the one we're discussing, which is very timely and can't wait. That is, I move that number 4B be removed from bylaw number 172. That's page 12, yes.
All right, so through to Director Coates, is that sufficient for an amendment? I'm just going based on past
Yeah,
meetings and
generally
wordings and so
no.
on. Yeah,
So it could, if you want to add a bit so that it's, that staff are instructed to bring forward an amendment bylaw for council's consideration to delete section 6(4)B.
Yes, that's the amendment I'll make, please. And just for the sake of brevity, I will also add 2C and 4C to that. So the total being removed is 2C, 4B, and 4C.
Sorry, point of clarification. These are on page 12 and 13. They're part of section 6. Okay, thank you.
all right. Okay, so just through to Councillor Savage, because I'm a little tiny bit confused here. So you're referring to section 6, delegation of authority, subsections,
Subsections 2C,
2C, okay?
4B, and 4C.
Okay, thank you. I don't know why I was jumping around. Okay, and through Director Coates, do you? I'm still ready. Okay, sure. But yeah, no, that's fine. Just making sure. So just through the council, it's really what's happening here is it's a motion instructing staff to basically create an amendment bylaw.
And at the time we bring forward the bylaw, we could comment then in the report on the ramifications. Particularly for item 2C, council will recall, or see from the wording, that the form of the lease and license agreements are approved by council. The example would be, the encroachment agreements that were done along Lantzville Road when you had the survey done. So if we didn't have authorization from council for the form of that license, we would have had to bring every license agreement to council as the owners and staff finish the negotiation and then bring it back. And that is generally operational work that council doesn't usually want to be involved in, but it's absolutely council's bylaw, so.
Okay, sure. Appreciate that. Do we have a seconder? So second by Councillor Lerner, and then for discussion. So through the mover, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. This is basically, to be brief, in December 2018, when we were first presented these changes, these three I mentioned were before that under council's authority, and I may not have captured all of what was council's authority. There may be more in these, but we can discuss that when it's presented at the next meeting. But with lease agreements, they used to be under council authority, and with the authority to determine panhandles, that used to be under council authority. And the third one, strata, 2 strata titles or less, that also, I believe, used to be under council authority. So that's all I'm trying to achieve, is to take those back under council authority. And if there's a little more to it than that, then I dare say we can hone it, refine it at the next meeting when it appears we'll have more time. That's basically it. And it's very important with the panhandles because it's the type of thing that if we don't do this, it can be all done at the subdivision approval process, and we won't even know about it or have a say in it, and then it'll be at the approval officer stage after that. So that's why it's important if we want to keep on top of panhandles, which I personally don't find them appealing, and where I've seen them elsewhere. That's the idea for it. Thank you, that's it.
Okay, just 2 seconds, Councillor Lerner. Director Coates?
Oh, I thought I should clarify that when I arrived here in 2014, staff were already issuing, what am I trying to describe? A license of occupation and a lease if the lease form had, or the terms had been brought to council.
Yeah, okay.
So this was more to acknowledge that staff were doing it.
Yeah. All right, Councillor Lerner, go ahead.
Yes, I can support this motion because I want to see what comes back and then have a more fulsome discussion. I know we are on a tighter schedule today, so rather than have the full discussion, this will give an opportunity for staff to prepare it, have us have time to look it over, and then make a further decision. So I can support that. I think the more information we have for making a decision, the better. So that's good for me.
Any additional speakers? And for myself, and then we'll go to Councillor Jones. Yeah, this is just simply a motion to get the process started for making the amendment bylaw. So again, it'll come back to council at a later date. I don't know, I got director in the brain. It's from the RDN. So, Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the promotion there. Is this, you said, Counselor Savage, that this is time sensitive, so I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly. These sections for 2C, 4B, and 4C will be removed immediately, and at some time in the future, we are to receive a proposed bylaw amendment from staff. Do I understand correctly?
No, these will not be removed until the next meeting or the meeting after that. We actually have to amend the bylaw to remove it. But
Okay,
it's
thank
important
you.
we start today so that it can be done in the next meeting or two. If we leave it, it'll be another meeting or two after that.
Then do you want to put a request for a meeting that this comes back from staff, the next meeting being ideal if possible? Or are you all right with
If you
that?
want to make that amendment, you're welcome to.
Yes, please, I'd like to make the amendment that staff bring forward the proposed amendments to the bylaws at the next council meeting. And maybe you could insert the date for that, Director Coates.
So the motion you're making is to amend the motion on the floor by adding the words to the, are you talking the regular council meeting, the January 11th, 2023 regular council meeting?
Well, I think that is our next regular council meeting because the 12th is a special meeting. Would that satisfy you, Councillor Savage? Yes, thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Lerner. Any discussion on the amendment? I think it's pretty straightforward, just adds a time frame to it. So through to council, I'll call the question then on the amendment. All those in favor and opposed, it's carried unanimously. Now we're back to the main motion as amended. Anything further? Okay, hearing or seeing nothing, we'll call the question then. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. All right, so that disposes of, unless there's anything more to, if there's questions through to staff with respect to bylaw number 172, we'll move on. Do you have a question for 172? Okay, so through to council for 175. Again, I've already kind of spoken to that, but if there's specific questions this afternoon, let's have it. But if we're going to get into making any significant amendments or proposed amendments and so forth, that may be better to do that at a separate meeting. So Councillor Lerner, go ahead.
Yes, well, I believe at the last meeting, we already passed a motion that for January 11th, we see an amended version that, or sorry, a report on options to amend for the road standards and sidewalk standards to see less asphalt sidewalks and more permeable surfaces. The one thing I just wanted to note is, you know, that was specifically, I think, referring to parts of section 3 that had to deal with that, as well as parts of, let me just see here, 3.13 regarding sidewalks and the urban road standards that entails, as well as 3.15. So those are, I just want to note that that motion was already passed, and so we're going to, for January 11th, we'll see some options and ideas there, which I look forward to. And so I guess the only thing I would add, of course, is the hope is that when we get some changes there, we're going to see less requirement for storm drains and runoff and more stuff handled through natural assets and permeable surfaces. So I'm just very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
And through to the rest of the council. Okay, Councillor Savage.
Yes, I just want to make sure. Yeah, I just want to make sure through to staff are there any upcoming subdivisions which could possibly be approved for urban roads and all that they entail before we could get this altered and move away from urban roads on January 11th. So in the meantime, what I'm asking, is there any chance that more urban roads could be approved before that?
Through your worship to Councillor Savage, there's basically only one subdivision that's, well, two subdivisions that are actually in play right now, and both detailed designs have been approved with the current standards. So there's nothing else other than the two initial ones that are in the works now, so.
And which two are those, please?
The Sabrina Road one and the Med property is the other one. And it's just the first phase of the Med property that's been approved.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so others that, where the rezoning has been adopted, there's no chance that they'll be proceeding with the urban road standards before we can change this bylaw?
Through your worship, the detailed designs have been approved using the existing ones now. So what's been approved, I cannot go back and say, you cannot do that. You have to do something else now because all of those designs have been done and plans have been laid out to accommodate those roads. The areas in question are not major roads of any sorts. They're the narrower local roads that we've had in our standards and specs since the original standards and specs in 2005. They just have a walkway with them now. So basically, the original standards identified a permeable surface, and somehow in the new standards, it became permanent concrete or asphalt surfaces. So that there's that issue that's come up with just doing the research on trying to identify things that could come forward. So currently, the two subdivisions that have plans identified and approved, Sabrina is just about done. They just need to do the paving, so they're way beyond what we can ask for. Phase one of the Med property is has been approved, but phase 2 and 3 have not been approved yet. So those other phases, we could look at changing those if there's changes done to the actual bylaw itself.
Yeah, I understand with those, but there's others that have been approved. There's another one on two on Dickinson Road. I understand that the first one, the Lot A, Dickinson, is obviously past that point where you change things. Now, there were ones which I declared conflict on, which I won't bring up, but you get my point.
Nothing has been approved at this point, yes.
I'm sorry?
Nothing has been approved at this point.
Yeah, okay, and my question is then for ones that maybe have been adopted, the rezoning has been adopted, is there any chance those will be approved before we can get at this on January 11th? Maybe Director Litt.
Yeah, I believe the applications you're referring to are the rezoning applications on Harwood Road. So we have received subdivision applications for two of the properties that were rezoned. Those are the properties that front on Alds Road, but their actual address is on Harwood. For one of them, we've issued a preliminary layout approval. But as Director Spears has indicated, we have not received any sort of detailed design drawings from the applicants at this point in time. As far as the other subdivision application on Harwood, we have not issued a PSR at this point in time. We're currently reviewing their submission.
Yeah, because I just want to know this because I'd be prepared. It sounds like there's consensus on council for these urban roads and to not have any more, and or at least for the most part. And if it comes to that, then I don't know if would be, necessary to have a special meeting and so on. So is it possible to keep that in mind, that this is what council has indicated, that they want to get away from these?
I think, given discussions that's taken place, I think it's fair for us to have a discussion with the applicants to indicate this is, there's a new direction that's being proposed with respect to design of road standards. I think before I forget, there's also one last application that's in play here, and that's Foothills. So they did submit an application for their Phase 1E. We've issued a preliminary layout approval letter to them for that. And certainly they're in the process now of preparing their detailed design engineering drawings to facilitate that subdivision. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, that's great. I'll leave my other comments until I've heard from others. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Director Limshu, for your open mind there in talking with the developers for, I guess it's the Olds Road. Sorry, he has his hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Director Limshu?
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I forgot. Just, it's actually a fairly important piece of information. There is a provision in the Act whereby it gives an applicant, someone has made an application for subdivision, there's a 12-month period for them to complete their subdivision. So, you know, these applications that I've referred to, you know, they've already submitted their application, they're in stream. You know, and if the bylaw were to change tomorrow, they still have 12 months to complete their subdivision under the current standards. You know, having said that, I think, you know, as staff, we can still certainly approach them to see whether or not they would be willing to look at alternate forms of design standards. But I just want council to be made aware that push comes to shove, they're still, they can still proceed with their subdivision applications under the bylaws that exist today. And that also includes the design standards.
Yeah, and further to that really is like if someone has started the process for rezoning, it's whatever the zoning is and at that point in time remains active as well for 12 months, correct? Is that along the same lines?
Rezonings are a different animal. You know, the condition I'm speaking to specifically refers to subdivision applications, and I think that was the question that Councillor Savage was alluding to. So I can certainly answer that question and say yes, there is a 12-month window for the applicants to complete their subdivision under the current bylaws.
Okay.
After the new
After,
bylaws,
yeah.
yeah, after the new bylaws adopted.
All right. Thank you for being patient, Councillor Jones. Go ahead.
Yes, so again, thank you, Director Limshu, for having those discussions with the developers. We may be pleasantly surprised. They may be very happy to hear this change in direction from council for two reasons. One is it potentially is less expensive to use a rural road system for management of water. And second, there are environmental advantages as well that may be of importance to people. I have one other question for you, if you don't mind. It is with respect to on page 23, road configuration, section 3.1. It talks about major and collector roads are to be continued without jogs through the area. And I don't know exactly what that means and if it applies in this situation where I feel there is a jog in the road in front of the Sabrina development as you proceed down the Lantzville Road towards Superior. The curb for the sidewalk comes out into the road, probably, I haven't measured it, 2-3 feet maybe, enough that at the moment it's single lane traffic. Is that considered a jog? And if so, what is the solution to it?
Through your worship to council, that particular area is not considered a jog. It's what's considered is basically a traffic bulb. It's to slow down the traffic going through the area. It's a form of traffic calming, actually. And it's used quite heavily throughout communities up and down Vancouver Island to mitigate the speed of traffic.
Thank you. So do I understand then that a jog will be put, a jog which isn't a jog but is actually a traffic calming feature, will also be put in on the other side of the road, and that section in front of Sabrina will be single lane traffic? Or will it just be very tight, snug two-lane traffic?
Through your worship, it'll be tight, snug, two-lane traffic, and that's the way the design has actually been to mitigate speeding through the area. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
I think that's called a horizontal deflection, is that right? When you squeeze the road to slow people down, and speed bumps are vertical deflections. Anyways, learned this useless knowledge for later in my life. Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Thank you. One more point on that, if you don't mind. I am familiar with these pinch points for traffic calming, and they can be very effective. However, they are often stress for people riding on bikes. And the solution that some communities have to this, I'm thinking of Port Moody, which has quite a few of these pinch points, is to put up a share the road sign right prior to the pinch point and a large bike logo to indicate cars are to share the road with bikes on the road. Do you have plans for those?
Through your worship, not currently, no, but it's definitely something we can address.
Thank you.
And I guess really through to staff or Director Spears, would you need a motion of council at some point in the future for that? Or is that something that can just be noted internally to include future plans?
Yeah, that could be noted internally, and it can be done that way.
Sure.
One thing that I would actually request of council is if you have any comments or concerns regarding bylaw 175, please email them to me so that I can incorporate them into the actual report.
Okay. Hopefully council got that message, right? We're gonna send in questions and concerns on that. Good. So, and then is there anything further on bylaw 175? Councillor Savage?
Yes, this is another very important aspect as to me for a number of reasons, but with Sabrina road design, there's tall silver metal street light poles with 70-watt LED lights, yet I was very surprised. I drove up Spence's Way last night and there's no street lights whatsoever on the length of Spence's Way, just at the start there. And then when I drove up Harwood Drive last night, the main collector road to the foothills had nothing but 13-foot high 14-watt lights and nothing else. So what sort of discretion do you have for these new subdivisions? There's, just to finish, there's mixed feelings. Some people like the big street lights, others don't. But to me, the defining reason is saving money. And the hydro street light team told me that you really have to go well below the 70 watts in order to get your hydro savings, and that's proven out with our hydro bills haven't really gone down, so we put it, since we put in the LED lights, so, yep.
Okay, just for, through your worship, for clarification on the streetlights and the BC Hydro billing, basically at the seminars and all the meetings I had prior to them changing the lights over, there was an indication that municipalities would not see any savings because they were looking at recouping their capital costs through revenue. So right off the bat, they told us we weren't going to get any savings for those lights that we changed to LED. As far as the smaller lights, we try to encourage new development to look at dark skies policies. In some areas, it's identified that it's having streetlights is not really required in some areas. And however, I mean, there is, after the fact, there is a few people that do complain about not having streetlights, but we've had more complaints about having streetlights than not having streetlights in the community. So it's one of those things where you know, you can't please everybody all the time, yep. and we understand that. So, but most times when we're looking at this, we try to adhere to dark skies policies. As far as the Sabrina goes, those are directional LEDs, so basically they'll be like a flashlight shining down onto the street, and they conform with the dark skies policies as well.
Yeah, I must say I prefer the lower ones. So how did the lower ones happen on Harwood Drive? On the way to the foothills, those 13-foot high, it looks like they are ones.
When looking at the development up in the foothills, a portion of that road, the collector road is Harwood Road. It turns into Alls Road, and then it basically hits the highway. So it's considered a collector. And on collector roads, you really should have lighting for emergency vehicles and all the rest of it that happens, at higher speeds. So those are the types of things that you have to take into account when you're identifying what you require on roadways, whether you put lights on or you don't put lights on, or those kind of things.
Yeah, I'd sure like to see more of those in subdivisions as opposed to the glaring ones that even if they're directional, they're so high, you can't help but, have them shine down in one's eyes. And the other point I'll just make about Spence's Way, it's why I don't like this urban road design, and that is there was a number of cars parked on the road, turning it into literally one lane because the yards were full of snow. And that's the problem. You've got a deep ditch on one side, and where you could have put an extra parking lane, rural style, on the other side, it's got a curb and a sidewalk preventing anyone from parking on the shoulder. It has to be right on the road. They park, turning it into one lane. And it's the other funny thing is when there's delivery trucks there, they often straddle the sidewalk and the road, one wheel well beyond the sidewalk, the other wheel on the road. So it's just you don't have those problems with rural roads. And the other one I've noticed, I drove around looking at all the curbs in Lantzville and the snow, and the snow plow generally left 1 foot to 2 feet of snow away from the curb because they're afraid to hit the curb, damage the curb, or for whatever reason. And then when so it narrows the roads in the snow, forces people in towards the center of the road. And then the other thing is, I've seen this so many times in cities where the slush, where the snow turns into slush, and you get a big truck or any vehicle going by, and the poor pedestrian on the road, gets sopping wet with, slush from the curb holding in. It's like a dam. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, and I'll leave the discussion till January 11th. Thank you.
I just had a real quick comment. So just in terms of, not to harp on the light or lamp posts or whatever, but is part of the foothills, is that not part of their form and character, like in going with that style of lamp standard?
Yes, it is. It's a part of their overall character building type of development, I guess.
Yeah, so
More-
I mean,
more
I'm
for
guessing
natural.
that's above and beyond what, I actually haven't looked at the ones on Sabrina, but it sounds like maybe the foothills went above and beyond what's, is going in on, Sabrina in terms of the,
They were
lamps
very,
and-
they were very specific on the lights that they presented and what they wanted in their subdivision, so.
yeah, fair enough. I know they're going for an overall theme, so.
Just like council's going above and beyond, Mayor Swain.
Councillor Jones?
Yes, I'd just like to make a note that I hope, since we're pressed for time tonight, we can return to this discussion in the future to talk more about dark sky policies. I acknowledge that the LED lights are directional, but they are very high, and they throw a huge amount of light. I personally would be in favor of, when bulbs need replacement, them being reduced in wattage, and also to have lower posts. They're particularly a problem when you reside downslope of one of these LED lights, whether it be because your home is just located a little lower than the street light, in which case they literally shine into your window. They're not as bad with the directional as the old lights, But if it does happen, there's a lot more light because the LEDs throw it. So I look forward to returning to this discussion. I think the dark sky policies are very important for Lantzville. Thank you.
Is there anything further before we move on? All right, and again, just a reminder that submit your questions or comments to Director Spares. All right, so it takes us on item 10A. So we have the options for surveying, for resident input and for engagement. We have for information. Is there anything from staff to introduce this? It's quite a comprehensive report. Okay, through to council. Is there any questions, comments? Go ahead, Councillor Lerner.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate this report. I note that a lot of the communities out there that are listed are using online survey mechanisms. SurveyMonkey seems to be the less expensive option and one of the more popular ones. But I am also very impressed with the Bang the Table software that I see on here, although, of course, it's hard to judge based on purely on paper. I also note the recommendation of developing a communications policy, communications plan, communications strategy, and et cetera. And I'm hoping that that will come out a little bit in our strategic planning. I think regardless of what our communications plan is, now that we're in the 21st century, I think we're going to be looking at the possibility of using engagement surveys with the community online. SurveyMonkey is something I've used. It's very basic, but it's also quite inexpensive at about $2,000 a year. Bang the Table a few times more than that, but it can do a lot more. So I did have a motion, and we'll see if council will entertain it. The motion is fairly straightforward. I know we're short on time today, so it's that council direct staff to arrange a demonstration from Bang the Table for council's consideration.
Okay. Do you have a seconder? Oh, actually, before we. Okay, so seconded by Councillor Savage, and then you're probably gonna have to read that back, Councillor Lerner.
Sure, I'll read it back. The council directs staff to arrange a demonstration from Bang the Table for council's consideration.
Okay, Director Coates.
Okay, so this is where we go back to our George Cuff session of council role and staff role. So council's role is to identify your goals and objectives, and you'll certainly do that through your strategic plan. And then it's staff's role to let you know what money would be required in staffing resources. And then staff would set about enacting it. It would be very unusual for council to get involved in selecting, financial software or communication software. Certainly, Bang the Table, you can see it being used by the municipalities that we've listed, but I can almost guarantee you that their councils did not have the demonstration and pursue it that way. I think the important message here is that if council is interested in that, then it's something staff need to, you need to instruct staff to prepare a special request form to bring to the financial plan, because every local government that is using that program has anywhere from 1 to 3 full-time communication staff. So it's simply not possible with our current capacity in corporate administration. We're maxed out, we're having trouble, getting out our communication tools that we already have. And while we can prioritize based on council's direction, if this is a priority for you, we can't prioritize to the extent that we can manage. I tried to describe what the staffing requirements are to use Bang the Table. And, they're vast. And it's not just for corporate administration, it's for every department. Because what happens is that the communication staff person within the corporate administration department, they're full-time people, just doing communications. They will design the page, it's their project pages. And they'll design the project page, and then they will usually set it up so that if there's specific questions or posts, that it points to the department head responsible for that project. And they're very much project-based. So it's not like a website or a social media page where it's just about the organization. Like, it's very much about a project. And so, like, for example, for the RDN, they might have, 7 or 8 projects on at once, and people have to register for each one. And then they will get notifications when things get posted there, and then they'll have an opportunity to participate in that.
Okay.
But certainly, we did have had information from Bang the Table, and yeah.
Okay, I understand. So Councillor Lerner.
So just,
Maybe if you can speak to your intent.
Yeah, the motion has been moved and seconded, so I'll speak to the motion. The motion is essentially not in any way to step on the toes of staff or to infringe on any different separation of duties. It's that we're going into strategic priority, and judging from this, if we decide in our strategic priorities that we just want to do basic survey once in a while, SurveyMonkey satisfies that. If we decide that we want to actually do a lot more with the community, then it sounds like, I guess we're just trying to understand what Bang the Table is capable of, and then from there. So maybe at this point, the motion is a little early. Maybe we will see in our strategic priority, but then I'm wondering, maybe instead of a demonstration, if I would wonder through to staff what is recommended for bringing information on Bang the Table beyond just these 4 pages, what information to understand what our options would be during the strategic priority session, so that we can then direct staff as to what our priorities are with communication.
Well, your strategic priority is so closely linked to your financial plan. So you have financial planning on the 23rd. That agenda is going to go out on Thursday, the 19th, which is the second day of your strategic planning session. So, we can provide you with if what council's asking us to do is a special request form, then we can do that up and provide additional information on that. But I can guarantee you it will include a staff position, and it will include the software, which is an annual fee of at least $8,000. Plus, if you want the support services, it's another $1,500 for this kind, $2,500 for that kind per year. So it's not an inexpensive undertaking, but I'm not saying it's wrong. I mean, we would be so happy to have the benefit of a communications person within our department, which a lot of other municipalities have that position already. So it's not all left to Nelda and I running around trying to get things done up.
Okay, Councillor Savage, go ahead.
Yes, I move we refer this motion to January 11th council meeting.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so we've had a referral motion made to January 11th, so it's being moved by Councillor Savage, second by Councillor Lerner. Any discussion on that? And really, it's just debating the reason why and so on, and date and time. Go ahead, Councillor Mundell.
Yeah, I can support that. After going through the information provided, I think it might be good to tie this closely in with our strategic plan and initiatives so that we can formalize it a little bit more stringently.
All right, so again, we're just voting on this one motion. Doesn't mean we can't continue to talk about basically the report that we received. So I'll move then to calling the question on the referral motion. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. Now we're back to just the report for information. Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to staff for that very comprehensive report. I also found it quite useful. I think money obviously is something we will need to look at in strategic priorities. The SurveyMonkey may be and more affordable option, and it may be useful, but there was not enough information in the report for me, only because I'm not very familiar with the system. I've only used it at its cheapest level. You can buy in for, $29 for something like that, and at least all of the responses will actually be given to you on a daily basis, whereas the free version, it maxes out after, I can't remember how many, 70 responses or something. If you get more than that in a day, they're not going to tell you about it. I assume the $2,000 version you refer to is somehow different. A couple of things that I think would be very important are that we can ensure it is a Lantzville resident that is completing the survey, if SurveyMonkey is used, and that each resident can only complete the survey one time. If you are able to answer those questions now, I'd be delighted. If not, perhaps we could just look into it in the future. Thank you.
I can't definitively. I think if council wants more information on SurveyMonkey, we can provide that at the next meeting. The same question may apply to Bang the Table. That there's, there is no, and that's where the debate became with PlaySpeak, between PlaySpeak and Bang the Table. With PlaySpeak, people had to register and indicate where they were from. And with Bang the Table, they didn't, but more people, less people would register for PlaySpeak. So that's why some municipalities have switched over from PlaySpeak to Bang the Table.
Okay, any additional?
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I've got those two questions. Is it a Lantzville resident, and what was the second question?
Just to permit one response per person.
Okay.
Councillor Mundell?
Yes, just appreciating the work and the table format that went into this research. It also kind of reiterated and reinforced the reason why I brought this forward, was recognizing that almost every municipality listed here has some form of engagement tool, online engagement tool. So for me, it's just kind of reinforcing the fact that we need to reach out in these more innovative and more, I would say, updated methods of engagement. So as much as I still agree that in-person meetings and roundtable discussions have their place, I still think there needs to be a hybrid of how people can interact. So this really actually just reinforced that for me. So thank you.
Director Coates?
It was a lot of information, and thanks to Nelda for helping compile the table. But just for clarity, most of the municipalities and local governments on this table are much larger. And as I said, they have full-time communication staff. The ones that are smaller, their online engagement was in the form of their website.
Sorry, Councillor Mundell?
Just pointing out that Tofino, population 2,600, uses Bang the Table. So, and yes, I realize they have a one-person FTE dedicated to comms, but pretty impressive that a smaller municipality can afford and uses and engages with Bang the Table. So
yeah, but the key thing was they have a full-time communications staff person, and they have had for about 3 years, I think, and they're not sure yet because that person's just finished last week, so they're undecided yet on what they're doing with that position.
Yeah, and the other thing too is Tofino is distinctly different from Lantzville. It's basically it's a tourist destination. It's got lots of resorts, and the population does vary depending on the time of year and so forth. And I don't know what their financials look like, but they may have way more money in the coffers than what we have to be able to afford. Staff and everything else that's being listed. For myself, with this what this has really illustrated to me is, it's, you kind of have to look at the bare bones approach to things and keeping things simple, especially, when it comes around to engaging the community and sometimes the tried and true is what will prevail, I think, here in Lantzville, which is doing more of the town halls and that type of stuff. And if we're going to go down the path of some of these other tools, then we have to keep it really simple and not involve much staff time. And maybe there are ways of doing that. So if we can make it a big onerous process, or we can keep it simple and to the point and not overuse it and keep it, affordable for the municipality, because we don't have a lot of money in the coffers. That's really what it comes down to. Councillor Lerner, go ahead.
Yes, I agree. Money is very important, and certainly in our strategic planning and budgeting, we have to consider that. Maybe the simpler route of the Survey Monkey, pending the answers to some of those questions from Councillor Jones, might be the better route to go. But again, I think as staff had said, it comes down to what we decide in our strategic priorities, how we want to communicate with the public, and then staff will hopefully help inform us on what the best tools to achieve those objectives are and what the costs would be. I think that we do need to move into the 21st century with our communication. Doesn't mean we stop doing town halls or public hearings or anything like that, but even if once a quarter we send out a survey to the community, $2,000 might be worth it for the, but again, I think this is wonderful information to have going into our strategic priority session, and I thank staff for this report. And then as we go into strategic priorities starting December 12th, we'll be able to determine what sort of communication with the public is some of our priorities, and from there we'll get a better idea of what our options will be, and that'll inform the budget process. So it aligns nicely, and again, I thank staff for their work on this.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider too is there are survey companies as well, so there's always the option to do, to consult it out depending on how specific the questions are and so on, and they can do sampling, and they don't need to do huge sampling, so which keeps the dollar amounts down, and when you do the statistical analysis of the data that they're able to get in a short period of time, typically it's very reliable and typically valid, and or very valid for not typically, but very valid, and does the trick. So again, I like the idea about discussing this further at strategic planning, and we'll go from there. Councillor Jones.
Yes, I think time is short, so I'm ready to move on. But first, I would like to say that I fully agree with Councillor Mundell and Councillor Lerner that we need to move into the 21st century and get some sort of online engagement. I'm sure we can do it at minimal cost. Thank you.
Okay, unless there's anything further, we'll move on in the agenda. Okay, so we're under 10B now, so with the Councillor Lerner's recommendation regarding the Ware Road Culvert Replacement 2023 capital project. So are you prepared to make that motion? Go ahead, Councillor Lerner.
Yes, whereas the financial plan indicates that an important culvert on Ware Road is slated to be replaced at substantial cost, and the budget/financial plan may take some more months to finalize. Therefore, be it resolved, the council direct staff to obtain for the January 23rd, 2023 special meeting of council a review report from an engineering firm as to how quickly the culvert needs to be replaced for safety reasons before risks become untenable.
Okay, is there a seconder to the motion? Okay, second by Councillor Jones. Discussion on the motion, go ahead.
Yes, basically, safety is a top priority in the community. It's very important. I know that the budget process is often completed by December, January, but in this case, we're looking at going into the end of January. In part of the public process, it might be until February or March before everything's completed. I'm hoping it'll be a lot sooner than that. But of course, with safety being a top priority and the fact that $110,000 is a lot of money, we may want to look at, whether this is an urgent safety matter. If the culvert is due to fail and we need to replace it this year, we may want to allocate that money sooner. And on the other hand, we may find out from an engineering report that it has a longer shelf life than we think. And so I think this is prudent for safety, prudent for due diligence, and it allows a timeline for full consideration for the January 23rd meeting, so we can act quickly if it's a safety measure. Thank you.
Hi, just so the motion could stand alone, if on the second to last line after the word culvert, we could add on Ware Road, because as you know, we don't put the preamble into the minutes, and otherwise, going from that council on, it wouldn't say what culvert.
Oh, yes, thank you. Culvert on Ware Road, if that's okay with the seconder, I think that
Well, we can
makes
just do it by unanimous consent, so unless anybody objects, we'll amend the motion to reflect as the words Ware Road. Okay, seeing no objections, it's amended. To the seconder, so Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Council Lerner has already expressed everything that I would say, so no need to repeat it. Thank you.
Anything further? Councillor Savage?
Yes, what I'm hearing from Councillor Lerner is safety first, and I do recall, ironically, it was the G property. Clear cut was the location of the water course that fed the culvert under the highway, and my observation was that culvert was overwhelmed with water surrounding the culvert and started liquefying and eating away at the soil around the culvert. And for me, safety always comes first. So with all this new trenching in Ware Road, the Village South location, my worry is that I don't want someone coming down on a dark, rainy night in a storm and suddenly there's a hole in the road where there was once a road, and the same thing happening where there's a bit of a sinkhole just because of this happening again. So it sure would be nice to get a definitive answer if this is critical right around the corner, being risky, or just what, but we haven't had the heavy rainfall with all these new ditching pouring into that culvert. So as I say, I would hate to find out that we were, this was brought up and that if necessary, if it has to be an emergency repair, I'd certainly support that. So that's why I like the motion. Thank you.
I'll just speak first, and then I see Director Spears has probably something to add. So for myself, in terms of the scope of work that's being asked, and this will probably end up being a question through to Director Spears, is this could be pretty significant, possibly. What scope, are we looking at here, and how much engineering time and so forth is going to go into this to find out if it's going to be perhaps the same answer as what we already have, which is it needs to happen now. And we're going to spend maybe thousands of dollars investigating, and I don't know what the scope of the work the engineers have to take out to figure out exactly or even plus or minus half a year or a year of what the lifespan of that culvert is. So as it stands now, I don't know if I can really support the motion because it may incur a significant cost and yield the same result. So that's just my concern. But through to Director Spears, maybe if you can speak to what I've, referenced or alluded to, which is, the scope of work that would be undertaken to find out, from a PNG, expensive, consultant to find out what's being asked there.
Sure. Through your worship to council, this one kind of caught me a bit off guard because for the last 20 years, I've been the one deciding on whether or not operational issues when it comes to culvert replacements and whatnot have been part of my job. I've actually gone out and inspected the culvert myself, and I've identified that it's actually in poor condition. It needs to be changed out. There's a good potential that there could be an event. I made council aware of that, I think, in one of the past meetings when we were talking about the discussion on this specific culvert. I did call the engineers when I seen the motion, and the answer I got from the engineers, well, if you're calling me to ask me that, then the odds are it needs to be changed out as soon as you can possibly do it. And the reason for that is that no engineering firm on the planet will take on any kind of liability when it comes to assessing a rustic culvert and giving you a timeline as when it's going to last, because you could have a truck coming down that truck route that's 30,000 pounds and could damage it tomorrow. So that's
Okay, and just as a follow-up, you do bring up the point, it is an operational issue, and I'm not aware of any issues with that function when it comes to this type of work. So, like that expression says about, the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And, this is obviously being an area in our municipality that has not had issues. So why go down this rabbit hole? That's my thoughts. Go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, as a quick follow-up, I thought this was a council issue because it was in the budget, and because the budget's been postponed to January, my concern was that council might be causing a delay, and that's my concern. So I didn't get that impression, Director Spears. My fault that you were saying it should be replaced literally as soon as possible. I thought it was sort of the idea just sometime next year. So how soon can it be replaced if you feel that it's a current risk right now? What's the story there?
the reason I brought that up is because in the past we've done these financial planning has been completed in November and December, and the tender would actually go out in January for the replacement of such a culvert. So that's kind of the process that we have been taking. And now, at the time, it was mentioned that it was going to take an extra month. So an extra month is not that bad. But if we're going to be talking about, if we're getting into May, then it becomes more of an issue.
So are the funds available now to do this?
The funds are not available at the moment unless council approves the project before the financial plan is
So we
approved.
could approve the project tonight, and then you'd have the go-ahead to do it. All right, so I'll make that motion then, or if we got a
Councillor
motion on the
Savage, yeah,
table
there's
here.
already
Yeah, we
one
got a
on the
motion
floor.
on the table, so I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Okay, so is there further debate on the motion that's on the floor? Okay, hearing nothing, I will move to calling the question. All those in favor and opposed? So noting that being unanimously opposed, so that takes us on to Councillor Savage. If you have a follow-up motion, and we'll probably need to.
Yes,
Oh, sorry,
I-
Councillor Jones.
I move that.
Hold on, Councillor Savage, Councillor Jones.
I have a further question for Director Spears. I don't know if you want that now or after.
Probably, yeah, if there's, Councillor Savage is gonna make a motion, so if there's a question that's related, then that'd probably be the time.
Yes,
So
I
go ahead,
move-
Councillor Savage.
Sorry, I move the special project proposed for the 2023 budget to provide $110,000 to replace the culvert on Lower Ware Road be approved.
Sorry, could I just get you to repeat that?
You're gonna, yeah. Go slow,
The problem with me making motions, I can't repeat them verbatim. All right, I move that the special project in the 2023 budget for $110,000 to replace the culvert.
Pause.
Can we put in Ware Road culvert?
Yes. Oh, yes, do that.
Lower Ware Road culvert. Be approved.
And we have it seconded by Councillor Lerner. And then really my question through the staff is will this work, this motion? Because obviously we're,
Through your worship, I believe the motion will work as long as I think it might actually have to add the inclusion into the 2022 financial plan, if we're looking at going forward right now, or we could wait until January and then identify it then.
That's what I was kind of wondering, so, because,
And I seem to recall some previous motions where it had the words for early release.
yeah, that's,
Because the bylaw hasn't been adopted yet.
Yeah, that's correct.
Would it make sense if it said for early release from reserves? Because I think that's where it was coming from in the proposed budget. Is that necessary?
no. It's just for early release.
Yeah,
I think
just for
that's,
early release. The funding is already lined up, so.
but it would, just a question through the staff, it would still appear as an expense coming from the 2023 budget. Is that correct?
That's correct. We wouldn't be incurring any expenses until then anyway, so.
And then the effect of this motion will allow you as a Director of Public Works to move this to tender.
Yes, it will get to a detailed design done.
Okay.
There has to be some calculations on flows and OCP build-outs and whatnot, so.
Okay, thank you. So to the mover, anything further?
No, it's just safety always comes first. So it's funny how many times throughout the world, after there's been a mishap, the first thing people say, if only. So thank you.
And to the seconder?
No, I just echo that sentiment, and I thank staff for being proactive on the safety measures. Thank you.
And Councillor Jones?
Yes, thank you. I have two questions. The first is, we've just set aside $110,000 as requested, but it's possible that this may be done for less than that. And I think we have had discussions earlier about where the remaining funds over the 110,000 go. So perhaps another councillor can speak to that when I'm done. And the second is through the chair to Director Spears. A question, please. You mentioned that the culvert is rusty. Could you just clarify, is it failing because the culvert is rusty, or is it failing because soil is washing out from around the culvert, as was the case, I gather, in the sinkhole that appeared on the Island Highway? Thank you.
Through your worship, yeah, just for clarification, the culvert is rusting, and basically what happens when the culvert rusts on the bottom, material does actually drift down on the sides. And so that's kind of where we're at with it. There's a few of them in the district that the ends have rusted out, but it's only a foot or two in, so that we can modify those to make them last. But then there's others that have more rust in the center, like the width of the road in the center of the road. This is where we're seeing the rust and the failure happening. So.
Thank you.
And maybe I can just make a comment about the remaining funds. Any remaining funds from any project within the district always goes back into where it actually came from. So if there's reserves, the funding that was identified doesn't actually come out of the reserves. It stays there. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Unless there's anything further, I'm going to call the question. Go ahead, Councillor Mundell.
What's the likelihood that we go over?
I wouldn't even attempt to try and answer that question. Just with the cost of everything these days, basically we looked at the cost as comparative to another culvert that we were looking at, and it was approximately $75,000 for about 10 meters less. In this case, we actually have to identify the flows that are coming through that property in order to do this culvert too. So.
Just trying to factor that in for our budget planning. Thanks. And any timeline? That's a pretty significant roadway. So once it's shut down, how long?
And it'll be done half at a time, so the road will always be open.
Okay, thank you.
Just wait any other project, yeah.
All right, unless there's anything further, I'm going to call the question. Okay, all those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. That takes us on, unless there's anything further, I think we're disposed of that 10B. Okay, so now we're on to 10C, which is the Phase 2 Village Commercial Core Improvement for Information. Is there any questions regarding this? Noting we're getting a little low on time. Okay, Councillor Jones and then Councillor Lerner.
I would like to discuss, unless we defer this, and I think it's been made clear to us it's pretty urgent. So there are two areas that I would like to discuss on this. And one of them is the bike lanes, and the other one is the stormwater management. Maybe I'll just, if I can, speak to bike lanes first.
Well, I was just going to ask staff real quickly, if you don't mind, if there was any follow-up with respect to the grant and the timelines around the grant itself. And then that may inform whether or not we have a big, robust discussion.
Yeah, through your worship, we've tried to contact 3 times and we have heard nothing back yet.
Okay.
So,
All right, so go ahead, Councillor Jones.
Okay, well, hopefully we're going to get some good news on that one. With respect to bike routes throughout Lantzville are certainly a very high priority. And this is what we know about bike routes. There can be many types of bike routes. This particular plan shows bike lanes. Bike lanes do work very well on roads where the bike lane is to the right of a white line, and particularly well when there's no pavement or curbs on the rider's right. Bike lanes with soft surfaces on the rider's right are much safer. The bike lane proposed for Phase 2 of the Village Core will have curbs and also parked cars on the right. When a rider passes a car, they require a fairly experienced move so that they do not get doored by the cars, as cyclists like to call it. What they do is they look ahead, they see the parked car, they shoulder check without swerving their bike to see if it's safe for them to move over. And if it is, they move into the car lane. But even the best riders swerve now and then, and when they do, in this plan, they will hit a car or a curb. So bike lanes with curbs and cars to the side are really not ideal. And I think there is another solution we should look at. I can see a plan where the road is shared with cars by the faster, more experienced riders. They are a small group of the people that ride bikes, but it would be nice to accommodate them. They typically will move between 25 and 35 kilometers an hour. That's 30 kilometers is an average speed for somebody out on a training road bike ride. So that's consistent with the speed that we want people to move through the village core with. Traffic calming, as we discussed earlier, might be a way to help this by pinching at Tweed Hope to narrow the road, as has been done already in the Village Core Phase 1. And again, the Share the Road signs and the painted bike logos are very helpful for identifying that it's a Share the Road space. There's a second group of bike riders in the community that is extremely important to address, and those are the younger kids, anywhere from 2-year-olds on their little run bikes to the 6-year-olds just learning to manage, slowing down and stopping and not swerving. And it really would be extremely hazardous to invite those demographics to be on a bike lane. But if we were to eliminate the bike lanes and let the experienced riders share the road, we could take that space, potentially, I'm putting it out there for consideration, and add it on to the walkways. The walkways would then become wide enough to be multi-use pathways, which would be excellent. And I can see, mom and dad and the kids out on a very pleasant, safe, comfortable, journey through the village core on such with such multi-paths. So it's this combination of share the road and multi-use paths that I think offer safe riding for all types of riders. And I look forward to hearing from other councillors on this idea. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lerner.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to staff for providing these detailed drawings, and also to Councillor Jones for that information and input. I agree with the principle that you're sharing there. In fact, I was looking at the pathways and thinking, well, if we're now looking, and it seems to be the general consensus, to have discussion on bylaw 175 on January 11th and moving away from asphalt sidewalks, then maybe the pathways could be permeable. I understand permeable pavers may work, something like that would still work for wheels, for wheelchairs, for strollers, for bicycles, for sharing the pathway. But those are a little more expensive, but on the other hand, they tend to last quite a while. And if the drainage, the stormwater runoff is handled by a permeable surface, maybe that'll reduce some of the costs involved in the stormwater pipes. I did have a question through to staff about the crosswalk on Dickinson and Lantzville Road, which currently is not a raised sidewalk. And I see a lot of drivers and a number of community members have voiced their concern to me that there's a raised sidewalk and then there's not a raised sidewalk, and then you go back to a raised sidewalk again, or not sidewalk, sorry, crosswalk. And the crosswalk on Dickinson and Lantzville Road is currently not raised. And I'm wondering if these plans include raising it to slow people down, or if there would be a large cost in making it a raised crosswalk.
Through your worship, the cost of a raised crosswalk is approximately about $4,500. There was no plans to actually do that in this case because that was part of phase 1 and we're on to phase 2. So there was, we didn't have any intention of going back into phase 1.
Okay, thank you. I just putting it out there for maybe consideration if there is room in the project budget when all of this is said and done, maybe we get the extension and have a little more time to look at it. The possibility of having that raised crosswalk to provide some safety, and also I love the idea of the wider pathways instead of bike lanes with permeable surfaces. But I'd love to get more public input on that, and I'm really fingers crossed that we get that extension. And I'll leave it at that for now because I know we're short on time. Thank you.
Further comments? Councillor Mundell, go ahead.
I, for one, like bike lanes. I bike a lot and I find them very useful. And I am probably one of those people, maybe not 30 kilometers an hour consistently, but maybe closer to 20. But I can understand, and frankly, I have been on many urban streets with my children in tow behind me or in front. And in bike lanes, it is challenging to make sure that they stay within that space and not move into the roadway. And large vehicles often take up a portion of that bike lane, which makes me very uncomfortable as a parent trying to navigate that. I am more comfortable with the idea of a multi-use trail, which is separate from the road. And as Councillor Jones indicated, curbs and bikers do not mix very well. There's no escape. There's no way of getting away from the road when the curbs, like the ones that are in the first phase, which are very large in my opinion, are in your way. So I would prefer to see something of a multi-use trail off the main road for cyclists and for slower moving cyclists and for pedestrians as well. So I can support looking into that if that's the direction we're going to go for this plan.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Savage.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm not so worried about a deadline for completion. I have no fear of that whatsoever. If we're a little late with completion, I don't see any huge downside if we've already done most of it. But at any rate, my suggested changes are move the bike lanes to the option of share the road and to the multi-use path. Next one, widen by 3 meters the sidewalk and change it to a brick paver multi-use path. Change the standing curbs to flush curbs to allow runoff and snow onto the shoulders where it can be absorbed by rain gardens or the ground. If there is a
Is this a
standing...
motion? Should I be writing?
No, this is an emotion. He's
Okay,
just
thanks.
seeing off things.
If there's a standing curb in front of the bus shelter, it will hold slush, so vehicle tires can spray the slush into the bus shelter, soaking people and books. Next is to add a plaza in front of the Legion, and next eliminate storm sewers from the Phase 2 plan. And last, consider converting the bike lanes to green shoulders. So those are my suggested changes to make this plan work. And whether we're short on time or not, I think this is very important to go through. It's very timely, this village improvement. So this section of village improvement is small and can be broken into 2 parts. On the ocean side, it is basically a safe walkway with a narrow fringe of greenery. On the south side, it is a complexity of parking, green space, and a walkway. The walkways provide safety for pedestrians, which is a good thing about this proposed plan. They're located well off the road, so that's a good starting point. This is one of the main objectives of this. We have to get a safe walking route through the village. The perpendicular parking in the area of the store is good. The truth which must be faced by everyone is we can have a lot of perpendicular parking in front of places like the Legion, or we can have a generous walkway. We can't have both. It's simply a given that if we're having a safe walkway through the village, and to me it's not a village core without a safe walkway, we're going to lose parking. It's as simple as that. And the rough estimate of parking we're going to lose is about 15 spots on that side was my calculation. So if we're going to have a safe pedestrian walkway, we just have to accept that. And for me, the main problem with the proposed design, it lacks people gathering places, which is a main feature of the OCP and the village improvement plan. And that's why the plaza in front of the Legion would be a very good idea. It's as simple as you just put a rectangle with pavers, the same as the path, and then leave it at that. And then at a later date, we can fill it with artisan furniture and volunteer objects, art, and so on. But the key is to have that plaza space there. We'll lose a couple of parking spaces, and that's fine for a gathering area. So the basic problem with the design of the first phase and the second phase for me is if you have just 2 parallel straight lines going straight down, it gives you the appearance of this. So as opposed to breaking it up into gathering spots and a series of rooms, which is more like this. It's like a welcoming hug for people arriving. So that's why the solution is to at least have one gathering place there. And other than that, with the storm sewers, the proposed storm pipes are all underneath the paved road. So if we eliminated those from the plan, if need be, those could be put in at a later date. They don't have to be part of the plan because there's nothing above them except the road and the road shoulders that would need undoing if they were done at a later date. However, I don't want to see storm sewers there where you're basically using curbs to collect all the water, funnel all that water into drains, and to then pipe it past Tweed Hope by 2.5 houses into a ditch, which will also be piped eventually, and then it goes into the pipe down to Huddlestone Beach. That means all your oil and gas from Lantzville Road is basically ending up on Huddlestone Beach. So until we get a more fulsome approach to drainage, I would like to see any drainage works postponed and not be part of this plan. And if you do that, then all those savings will easily cover the cost of a brick paver pathway, which will be absorb the water, as well as getting rid of the curbs so water flows into area for drainage. So I'm hoping tonight we can agree on a plan, get it revised, get it to the public maybe early in January, and move ahead with it. And we've only lost about a month and a bit of time, which I don't think is a big deal. Thank you.
Okay, I haven't spoken to this yet, but I'll speak to it next. And then I think we have Councillor Lerner and then Councillor Jones. Yeah, so I think really through the council, the decision we have to make is whether or not we're moving forward with the current design. If we need to move this out to tender at some point and find out how, in fact, what it's going to cost us, even under the current design. There's lots of ideas I'm hearing this evening. Now it is almost turned into this evening with respect to making improvements, but those improvements won't come without a cost, so, or they will, sorry, come with a cost. So whether we're moving a bike lane or moving the bike lanes out off the roadway and we're moving it onto the, the pathways and making those wider and so on, those are all going to incur costs. If we're looking at different solutions for drainage, rest assured that's going to cost more money and so on. The one thing I do know, and this, I believe it is a fact because I've measured it a couple times, is it's about 400 meters from Colette Road all the way down to Huddlestone Road. I think that's accurate, 400 meters. That's what we're not even talking about 400 meters between phase 1 and phase 2. From what I gather, I think this is a very reasonable plan. I think it's a cost-effective plan, and we do have $500,000 of grant money in the balance here, and I'm hoping that with the current design, the additional monies that are being applied to this won't be inflated or won't be greater than what's already been approved. So. The gas tax money that is also going to make up the difference. That's not going to be further increased. So I'm not opposed to, if there's a delay to garner some additional input from the community with respect to the current design. But if we're seriously looking at changing the design, then we might as well just scrap it now. It's just, what's the point? It's those changes, what I'm hearing tonight, those changes will basically, it's gonna change the concept. I don't even think it could jeopardize the grant in itself. Because, now we're really deviating from what was originally submitted. And Director Spears, I know you can probably speak to that a little bit further, but, I do have some concerns based on what I'm hearing, and we may not entirely all agree on, the overall project here, but I think it meets the needs of the community. It gets people off the road and it keeps them safer. I think there's lots of great things about this plan. But if we're going to make some serious changes to it, we risk losing $500,000 of grant funding and just not moving forward with anything. So Director Spears, and then we'll go to Councillor Lerner, Councillor Jones.
Sure, through your worship. There are a few things that can potentially change without too much onus, and the removal of the bike lanes and increasing the pathway, it should be fairly simple with the AutoCAD. Removing the storm drainage is highly not recommended. I'm not sure, but I mean, over the past 20 years, I've noticed that there's an abundance of water that comes off of the store, the little mall, and all those areas. And yes, we would like to be able to absorb a lot of that back into the ground, and we will be able to absorb quite a bit of it, but there is no way that you can actually have that directional flow go back into the ground. So what the idea was is to put the pipe in down to the ditch line, and once the project is completed, look at basically planting some materials and stuff into the ditch, slowing the water down and treating it so that it goes out down to the Huddlestone outlet down that way. There was no intent of just having water rush down the ditch line, not being treated or not having any kind of infiltration anywhere in the system. So, I mean, that's something that, you know, we get into more of a detailed design than what you have here, kind of thing. So the overall design lends itself to some modification, but when it comes to making the huge modifications, that's a bit more tough. And if we don't address the stormwater issue that's there, then it could be seen as being negligent. I believe I shared that already, so.
Okay, Councillor Lerner and then Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Councillor Lerner, appreciate that. Yes, I hope we can figure out the storm water management plan and discuss this further. I'm very happy to hear you say, Director Spears, that changing the bike lanes, which I consider to be very unsafe, and going the share the road and the multi-use is doable. So thank you, that's excellent. I wanted to look at stormwater management and just reflect back on both Bylaw 175 and our official community plan. Bylaw 175 says, and I quote, "All new developments require a rainwater management system that will retain natural water flows on the land as long as possible and will maximize groundwater storage." And later on in the bylaw, it says again, quote, "Any flow of surface water from adjoining land or from the subdivision land shall be maintained naturally along the existing ground surface." Now, I recognize that it might not be possible to do that exclusively, and we may need a combination of green management systems and gray infrastructure, but I am not confident that that discussion has been fully explored. And I think residents will also remember that when they did the OCP, that there was a high priority on storm water management. And in the village core, that was discussed in the OCP, and it asked for an open ditch system that will infiltrate water flowing to the beach, used in combination with effective rainwater systems. That would include rain gardens and vegetation areas in order to minimize the flow through ditches to the beach. I also want to point out that evidence has demonstrated that the number one source of water pollution in streams, rivers, lakes, and oceans is stormwater. So I think we need to be very diligent on this portion of the discussion. If it causes delays, that may well be something that we put a value on doing, a good reason for it. The OCP also states a goal for our foreshore. It is a development permit area, our foreshore, and the OCP states that in order to protect it, it's important to, and I quote, "refrain from disturbing or polluting marine and related terrestrial natural habitats." End quote. And it's my feeling that we've already done enough damage to the foreshore, and that it is worth making sure we don't further that process. So that's my little pitch on that. We may end up with some combination system, and I was happy to hear Director Spears say that there are plans down the road for treating this water before it goes to Huddlestone Beach. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lerner.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the idea that some of this can be more easily modified than other parts, and I was pleased to hear about the idea of widening the pathways and removing the bike lanes. I'm very interested also in the idea of the raised crosswalk. Also, the notion that maybe if those pathways become, you know, permeable pavers, or I think it was Councillor Savage who mentioned the brick pavers, that maybe that will be somewhat more permeable and reduce some of the amount of stormwater going into those pipes. I don't know exactly how that functions, so that's good. The way I see this progressing and is that taking these suggestions that we've had around the table and that we'll continue to discuss today, that hopefully staff can go back to the table with the drawings and see what is more easily changeable, like the widening of the pathways, removing of the bike lanes, maybe the permeable walkways, how that could reduce the amount of stormwater piping needed. Maybe if they're permeable, we can take out some of those pipes, and then basically coming back with a plan that we can then take to the public for public input, and hopefully all of that can come over the course of, a month and a half, so that it's not a major delay. I know no one wants to delay the project unnecessarily, so that's sort of how I see it moving forward. I'll let the rest of council discuss, but that's sort of the vision of what I'm hoping we will accomplish today. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Savage.
Yes, we're almost there. If it's not a problem, having the bike lanes in a multi-purpose path, making it wider, having that brick pavers, then that's pretty well accomplished. What I saw were the major changes needed. And the only idea of this storm pipe system, stormwater pipes, is simply this, is that we're doing nothing in this, in these upgrades here that produces more runoff per se. So I don't see the reason why it's so critical to have a drainage system included with this grant. As I say, if it proves that it's absolutely necessary, you do it. You can do it after the fact. Just what's here without the storm drains will likely come in under, come in around budget anyway. The last phase one was 40%, as I recall, over budget. So if we can remove the storm drains, we to look it over, or the storm water system until pipes, then that's a big savings, and that will assure us that we'll be on budget or even under budget. So I don't see the relationship. If we need these pipes so badly, they don't have to be part of the grant. We're not going to lose the grant just because we cut that out of it. And so I think we're basically there. And the plaza I'm suggesting is nothing either. It's just bare bones. You're just expanding the path to widen the multi-use walkway. You're just expanding it to widen it right to the roadway. It's as simple as that. And then you can fill it in later. Maybe just leave room for a tree and some greenery at the road edge, and it's done. So it's I consider all these changes very minor. And the sticking point to me are the curbs. I don't find them successful. You're going to be trapping snow, trapping water on the road, and so on. I would far prefer the flush curbs. And again, I see that as a minor change. And then leaving these very expensive storm water pipes, which basically go from the parking in front of the store all the way down the road shoulder, then into the middle of the lane on the road, all the way down not only to Tweed Hope, but past Tweed Hope by 3 houses, and then entering the ditch there. So that to me is a major expense. It will actually save time to not do this storm water pipes, and it will also save money. So I don't see it being a big deal at all. And I think all our changes are very much in keeping. Basically, it's a decent design. If you add the plaza, it solves that problem of the gathering place. The rest is from the store. I would leave the perpendicular parking. That's very well done. You've got a lot of cars in there. The bus shelter area can be left. It's just the curbs that are the problem. And then the rest, all the way down to the Legion, just put in that expanded multi-use path for the Legion Plaza, and it's done. I don't see it being a big deal at all. So what I'd like to do is get consensus on the changes we all feel would be good, and then go from there, or if we need a special meeting to quickly do it, we can do it then. But I agree with the time. We've moved very fast. This is just 1 week. We seem to have had consensus tonight on discussing some things, so I think we're almost there. Thank you.
Okay, just, I'm gonna have Director Spears speak to probably the storm water management, because I did hear him earlier mention that it would be negligent not to do that part of the project. So, Director Spears, if you
Sure,
wish
and-
to expand, please.
First off, I'll address the curbs. Right now, they're non-mountable curbs that's identified there, and that can be changed to mountable curbs. But we need somewhat of a curb to actually delineate the planting area from the roadway itself. So having a flush curb would just see vehicles drive directly into the greenery. So we need to have a bit of a buffer there between the plantings and the roadway. So if we went with a flush curb, then basically you would see traffic going through our gardens. So at least with the mountable curb, it gives them some indication that they shouldn't go over that.
Yeah, my idea was just a flush curb and then a bit of a shoulder, and then the greenery would start. So there is that buffer already, and that's already there. There's already, the white line is the edge of the road lane, so you could leave a good part of that asphalt there, and then it bleeds into the gardens, so the cars wouldn't be directly adjacent to the gardens.
But you have to have something delineating the garden itself. Even though if it's just the shoulder of the road, people would tend to park and go onto the greenery.
So in the spirit of time, let's move on. And so we have
The-
the second part, which is the stormwater
The
management.
stormwater management, and now that I've made council aware of the situation there, that there is a level of risk involved if you do not install the storm system, just for the record. And also to identify, there is a stormwater system that is out here in front in phase 1. And the gardens actually accept water from the roadways and sink into a storm drain that eventually does go out into a ditch. So the water does go through the garden areas in phase 1 and then goes out into the ditch down to the Colette system. So those were the kind of thoughts we were having for phase 2, is that the water would be collected, go through those systems. Some of it would go into the catch basins and then move down towards Huddlestone Road that way.
Okay, so I have Councillor Mundell next. Go ahead.
So I'm still really unclear on how we'd be negligent not moving forward. Like, let's say we don't move forward, we don't do this project at all. Or we move forward with it, with the discussions or the recommendations that council's discussed tonight. Again, I'm not really clear on how either of those options would make us negligent.
Through your worship, when doing upgrades to municipal works or infrastructure, if you don't take into account all of the situations that are present, in this case, the flow of water that's coming off of the above properties, then if something happens, we could be seen as negligent. If we're doing nothing, then things are as they are, and we have not changed anything. But the minute we start upgrading, that's when we have to look at that stuff.
Okay, Councillor Lerner.
Yes, I think that there's some consensus at the table here about generally the direction we want to see, and there seems to be some indication from staff that these changes are, for the most part, possible. Not all of them, but some of them are possible, and potentially, if we go with the permeable surfaces, it could lessen the need for some of the piping. I'm sure that could be looked at when that's being looked at. So at this point, I'm wondering what direction staff needs from council in order to hopefully make these changes. I don't know if we need to list all of them, or if it can just be a motion to come back with another plan incorporating these changes, and then we can go from there.
Okay, so Councillor Lerner, I'm sure Director Coates will give that direction, because we'll need to do it by motion. So go ahead, Director Coates.
Yes, and that's, you've had great discussion, but we are a long ways away from being able to put this through to the province and to the engineers to get the drawings redone. So I've looked at the agreement, it's 15 pages long. There is nothing in here that talks about extensions. It's all about completion, March 31st, 2023. And I would think more that lack of response to the 3 messages is more to do with they are not interested in providing an extension. So I think it's fine for you to do the motion that subject to approval by the province, or is it, it's a contribution agreement? Is it a province? Just hang on.
Was a federal grant program.
Yeah. Yeah, it's Pacific Economic Development Canada, sorry. Subject to approval by Pacific Economic Development Canada, council instructs staff to prepare amendments to include and then list your amendments.
Okay, I appreciate that. And, you know, my thoughts through to council on this is if we don't move forward, then it, you know, again, we risk losing the grant funding. It's that simple. We can look at, you know, when I went to the presentation that was done by the, I can't remember his name, Harjeet Singh, or I'm trying to remember his name. Anyways, the minister that was basically in charge of the grant program, and it sounds like there, you know, like if there were any amendments required, it sounded like there, you know, they'd be amenable to that. The one thing we have to do is get this out to tender to find out how much is it going to cost. You know, that's ultimately what it comes down to is trying to figure out what the dollar and cents or what it, you know, the initial proposal is. In the meantime, we can instruct staff to look at augmenting the plan and basically taking the bike lane off the roadway and adding it to the multi-purpose trail. We can instruct staff to do that by motion, but I think delaying this is not wise. And that's just cutting to the chase on this discussion. We've heard from staff that, you know, we need to mitigate the stormwater management. It's been advised. If we don't do that, it could be deemed as being negligent in future. Why we'd go, you know, contrary to staff's recommendation on that bewilders me at this point. It sounds like the stormwater management will be effectively dealt with and we're not gonna have all this pollution going out to the ocean. So we really have to make a decision on this, council, if what we're doing, because if we do cause any unforeseen delays, we again risk the funding. But again, I did have some confidence when I went to the presentation or the announcement of the grant funding. The ministry would likely be amenable to changes to make this happen. If there's drastic changes to the plan, probably not. But if there's minor amendments made, I think as long as that grant funding is going to its intended purpose, then we would be okay. So, and those are discussions, I've not contacted the ministry yet, but I guess I could do that, but I don't want to step on toes at this point, but yes. So Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would like to get a response back from them to know for sure. It may be good news that it's possible to just push this back a few months. I'm very encouraged about some of the changes that Director Spears say will be relatively easy to do on CAD. And I'd just like to point out that the plans for having more green infrastructure in the stormwater management, these are stormwater management plans. I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to axe stormwater management. No, that is extremely important. I agree with you. We would be wrong to not consider the needs thoroughly that way. I am only requesting that they be considered according to the guidelines in our bylaws and in our official community plan, which call for the use of open ditches, rain gardens, green and vegetation whenever possible. And I'm just think we can make a little bit more progress along that front. Thank you.
And oh, and sorry, and I did want to just clarify, just with respect to the, you know, comments made around development and so forth. That has to, I believe, is in relation to subdivisions. not necessarily replacement of a roadway.
No, sorry, it's in the official community plan under the village core improvement, the quote that I referred to earlier.
Is that just as clarification, is that referring to the roadway, or is that talking to the new roadways that are be incurred because of new development?
It's addressing stormwater management in the village core.
Director Spears? Yeah.
Yes, bylaw 175, we basically try to stick to those standards with everything that we do in the district. We try to as much as possible. Sometimes there's just, circumstances where you can't. But for the most part, it's used for subdivision and construction of new subdivisions. But it also, we also look at it from a perspective as the district is, these are the standards that the council wants to run the district by, so that's what we do.
Okay. So I have Councillor Savage and Councillor Lerner.
Yes, I'd like to make an amendment then, please, to this proposed plan, just to move things along, as I heard clear consensus on that. So I have two amendments, quite brief. The first amendment is to remove the bike lanes from their current position and to expand the sidewalk by 1 meter wider
Is
to
1.5.
become a,
Hold on, Councillor Savage, you gotta pause.
So we've got that subject to approval by Pacific Economic Development of Canada. Council instructs staff to amend the design for the Phase 2 Lantzville Road project so first bullet is to remove the bike lanes from the current position. Does it say where it's going after that?
to the option of sharing the road and sharing the multi-use pathway. Which will be constructed with brick pavers to a width of 3 meters.
So, yeah, Director Spears, I have an idea where you're gonna go in with this, but go ahead.
There's walkways on both sides of the road, so we have to identify if you want 3 meters wide on both sides of the road. Oh, you do, okay, that's fine.
And sorry, it's just, will be constructed to a width of 3 meters with what kind of pavers?
Brick pavers to a width of 3 meters on both sides of the road.
And before we get it seconded, I just wanted to clarify, if we're reducing the 1.5 meter bike lanes, why wouldn't we want to increase the sidewalk or whatever to, by that same amount? So it's 3.5 meters.
You could do that, or you could just increase the size of the plantings. That would absorb more water.
Oh, I don't know, like, do we want a wider path or wider plantings? And I'm just throwing it out there because right now we're taking a 1.5 bike
It's
lanes.
3 meters, so it matches the ones in Phase 1, which are 3 meters.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, so right now I've got the motion that, subject to approval by Pacific Economic Development Canada, council instructs staff to amend the design for the Phase 2 Lantzville Road project to remove the bike lanes from the current position to the option, to be replaced by the option? Yes.
Just to increase the sidewalks to 3 meters. Or multi-use path to 3 meters.
So he had to the option of sharing the road and sharing the multi-use pathway, which will be constructed with brick pavers to a width of 3 meters on both sides of the road.
Yep, that's perfect. That captures it because we do not want to eliminate the bike lanes. It's important that we have the this mobile.
Okay, and do we have a
active
seconder for it? Second by
transportation.
Councilor Lerner. Discussion on the motion, if you wish to continue.
Yes, thank you. There's clear consensus on this, I heard, and we're not eliminating the bike lanes. It's very critical to understand this because for getting the grant, they want to see we're involved in active transportation. And just to let you know that
Just a
Councillor,
point of clarification there, that's not part of this grant.
what's that?
It's not part of this grant, like it has to be active participation.
Well, nevertheless,
or
if they see a
transportation.
change where you're deleting active transportation, it might make a big difference to them. So it's important to know we are offering the bike lane just as it is in phase one, where it's road sharing, or you have the option of going on the multi-use pathway now. So that's basically it for this motion. Thank you.
Councilor Lerner, if you wish.
Yeah, I think I definitely support this. I think it's generally seems to be a consensus. Staff has indicated that it seems to be something that's possible pending the grantor's approval. My hope is that that extra half a meter will be used for vegetation, hopefully absorbing more water. I don't think it needs to be in the motion, but I'm hoping that staff will take into consideration some of the other things that were discussed here today regarding curbs and piping and all those sorts of things. And hopefully we'll get some really nice plans out of this that the public can then have feedback on and we can proceed with due haste.
Okay, so through to council, I think all this motion will achieve is that we change the plan, but it doesn't mean that it's gonna go off to be submitted. So we're gonna be in the same place we are now, which is jeopardizing the grant. So unless there's further discussion, go ahead, Councillor Jones.
Yes, my comment on that is just the way I've been brought up. If you're going to do something, do it right. We have an obligation to the community, and I think we're getting close to having it done right. So that's sort of where I draw the line on that one. For terminology, just clarification going forward, bike lanes would refer to what we have removed. Bike routes are what we have put into the motion, the share the road bike route and the multi-use path bike route. Just to avoid confusion, we might want to stick with that terminology. Thank you.
Is that an amendment to the motion?
No, just clarification of terminology.
Okay, further discussion on the motion, which is to, go ahead,
Sorry,
Director
so
Coates.
we did, when I read it, I did have that subject to approval by Pacific Economic Development Canada. So we wouldn't be changing this unless they've agreed to either the change or the delay, and then it would be, the plans would be done and ready to go, ready to be tendered. But if council has a goal of doing something else, you probably want to put that in there.
Yeah, through to council, I'm seeing this is becoming a very messy process. And it's just my opinion at this time. And I just don't think it's giving as clear a direction as we should be giving moving forward. So at this point, whether the amendment passes or this motion passes or fails, I think we need to probably schedule another meeting to deal with this and move it forward. It's, again, this is complicating the process because we've already submitted a grant application and that's being approved as it's being laid out. Now we're making changes, so they may have to look at the grant in itself. Anyways, it's getting messy. Director Coates?
And the reason I said that, if this motion passed, if there's nothing else added, then we'd be in a position to go ahead, because council on November 30th passed a motion to cease work on the phase 2 until council had reviewed the plan and given recommendations. And further, that council be sent a copy of the most. So that has happened through this meeting. You're about to pass a motion to give recommendations of changes. So if there's, there would be no reason for staff to not proceed.
Okay.
If we get the approval from the province.
Okay,
or
I
from the
appreciate
Fed.
you reading that back because the sense I'm getting for council is they do not want this to proceed ahead until there's other changes made. So unless council, wants something else to happen, then let's move this motion forward, pass it, and let things move forward. But if you don't want things to move forward, we'll need a motions council to stop this in its tracks and make additional changes. So I have Councillor Lerner and then Councillor Jones.
Yes, just a clarification. If there was an amendment to the motion to achieve that, would it make sense for it to basically say that the plans then come back for a special meeting of council to consider? Like, basically, we're waiting to see if they will approve changes. If they say, yes, you can make these changes, then I think it makes sense for it to come back to council so that we can have the appropriate public input. So would an amendment
So-
with a special, would an amendment achieve that to the motion?
No, it wouldn't. There's nothing from this that says it needs to come back for further public consultation. That would have to be basically a motion of council giving that direction. So, as Director Coates read back, the original motion from the November 30th meeting, that's they've fulfilled what, we've asked staff to do. Now have a proposed amendment to the plan, and as long as they're fine with it, things will move forward. Okay, so is there a follow-up, Councillor Lerner?
Yes, I guess, sorry, what I was asking, and I phrased it poorly, was the motion that's on the floor. If that motion was amended to say, and further that the plans come back to council at a special meeting for further consideration, would that then achieve what I think council is looking for?
I guess the question is, why would it come back to council again?
There's no need.
You've given your instructions in this motion of what the changes you want. Are you anticipating more changes? Because then we're really in trouble. Because if we go to the why do I keep saying the province? To Pacific Canada and get the permission to make these two changes, we're not going to look very good when we say, oh, yes, and then it's going back to council, and then we're going to come back to you again and ask for more changes.
Okay, no, that clarifies, so I'll just leave the motion as is, thank you.
So Councillor Jones, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've been put in this pickle, and here we're stuck with it. But we have only just seen this plan a week ago, and there hasn't been any extensive public engagement. And those are situations I hope we won't, as a council, have to face again in the future. Having said that, I think Director Spears hopefully has a clear picture of where this council would like to go in the future, and there is now another meter of road freed up from the bike lanes to play with in the design. So I am willing to just put it on good faith that our operations Director Spears will be able to make some good use of it to assist with the water management, reducing flow in pipes and using more of our natural assets. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mundell.
So just, just clarifying then, are you, Councillor Jones, are you suggesting that we remove the stormwater or the storm management or the pipe system from the project?
I'm suggesting that we let Director Spears play with this extra meter and with the plans, knowing that our goal would be to reduce the gray infrastructure, use of gray infrastructure, and hopefully that can be done at reduced cost and other systems can be put in play.
Okay, so Director Spears, it's probably best he
Yeah,
weighs in on this because I don't think that's going to be the case, and I don't want anybody to be misled or.
Yeah, through your worship. I don't think the removal of the stormwater system, what we're looking at would be an augmented stormwater system that would have treatment facilities in the plantings identical to what we have out here. We may be able to shrink the piping somewhat by utilizing that. So it'll be a hybrid system because we know there's quite a bit of water that's coming off those properties that we need to take care of. But we should be able to get the calculations of infiltration within the planting areas and then identify the sizing of pipes from there.
Okay, Councillor Savage.
Yes, if I may make a suggestion, I really think we've waited so many years to get village improvement that we should do this correctly. And we got this time pressure here. So what I would suggest is we finish this off in a special meeting. So we come to all our conclusions, get a set course, and we move ahead with this expeditiously. We can't do that now. We're under too big time pressure. So if I may suggest we send this to a special meeting to be determined by email, the date, probably early next week, and get this nailed up tight so that there's no more delays. So if I may make that motion to refer this motion and the general topic of the Phase 2 village improvement to a special meeting to be determined, the date of which to be determined by email early next week.
So that's your motion.
Yes.
Does that include the rest of the agenda?
Special meetings is for typically a specific purpose, so.
Just for this item.
Okay. So Director Coates.
Just a reminder that you do already have a meeting next week. And so then we're in a situation where I don't want to say we've been pestering them, but we have phoned and emailed 3 times. So if they answer us tomorrow, it's a bit challenging to say we will know next week.
Okay, so we have a motion to whatever, refer it to a special council meeting. Is there a seconder to that? So second by Councillor Jones, and then for any further discussion on that?
It would be really helpful if council could just pick a date and time for Monday afternoon, like you already have. What time's the Monday meeting? 6 p.m.? You already have a 6 p.m. So if you did a 4 p.m. or a 5 p.m., bring in food?
Well, looking to
Anything to
council on
bribe.
this, if we're,
I'd be fine with 4 p.m. before the priorities meeting, especially if we get dinner, hey, Jonathan?
okay, 4 p.m., so we'll
4
just
p.m., yeah.
insert the time, 4 p.m., that would be the 12th, correct? Yeah, yeah, so, and then by unanimous consent, anybody opposed? No, okay. All right, so if there's no debate on that, I will simply call the question. So all those in favor, opposed, that's carried unanimously. All right, so that's takes us on to item D. Again, that's just for information. I don't think we're really going to be able to do much. If council wishes, we can just take the rest of the agenda and move that to, I guess, a future meeting, if that works.
Could we move it to our next regular council meeting?
Yeah, so that'd be items 10D and E, just refer those to our next council meeting. So that'd be January 11th. Okay, so I'll just make the motion to refer items 10D and E to our January 11th, 2023 council meeting. Is there a seconder to that? Second by Councillor Savage. Any discussion? Okay, call the question. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. All right, so we're on to item 12, our agenda. I know we're under time crunch now. We do want to get to our in camera, so Mayor and Council verbal updates. I'll just start off. I have nothing to report except for this technically would be our last regular meeting of council, so happy holidays to everybody out there. Yeah, that's my update. Councillor Mundell, and then we'll go around the horn.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Just a very quick thank you to Mayor and Councillor Savage and the Legion for putting on a really beautiful light up the tree night. My youngest was thrilled to see that and be a part of it. And also, I would be remiss if I did not thank the Lantzville Fire Department for the wonderful parade that came through the entire community, the amazing lights. So thank you both very much, or thank everybody who was involved in that.
Go ahead, Councillor Savage.
And for my updates, you each have a present, the new council and Mayor Swain, so please open them quickly. This is a 10-second presentation. Wow, would you look at that? Now,
Thank you.
there's a point to this. Number one, take a measured approach this term. Number two, you'll run into some people, give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And the most important thing, are you ready? Don't put your foot in your mouth.
Okay, so Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Nothing to add. Just want to reiterate what Councilor Mundell said. That was absolutely fantastic, the lighting and the fire truck display. I look forward to next year.
And Councillor Lerner.
Yes, just echoing those sentiments, especially thank you to the volunteers who worked on the lights and the volunteers who worked in the fire department on the show and the volunteers from the Legion who brought their own barbecue to make hot chocolate with, so including marshmallows. So that was quite nice. Thank you to everyone and happy holidays.
All right, and at this point, any late items to be introduced? Any notices of motion? And we have nobody remotely registered for public clarification, so we will move to item 16. So I'll just make that motion that the regular council meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91 D, E, F, G, I, J, and 92B, which is not included in the agenda, of the community charter. Is there someone prepared to second that? Second by Councillor Savage. I'll call the question. All those in favor and opposed, that's carried unanimously. Now we're in camera,